Good morning, you're listening to me, Wes Streeting, standing in for James O'Brien this morning. He's had the temerity to take a week off work, so you've a whole bunch of us standing in this week, and I'm delighted to be with you leading Britain's conversation between now and 1 o'clock. We're talking about a whole range of issues, the Boris Johnson's visit to the Ukraine and what you think we should be doing to support our friends and allies in their war against Russia. We'll be having a big conversation about cancer care in Britain just as we approach the lunchtime hour. And first of all, we'll be talking about the big story of today, the Chancellor who is fighting for his political survival. Rishi Sunak, whose tax affairs and his wife's tax affairs have now dominated the front pages of the newspapers for days, has referred himself to the Prime Minister's advisor on ministers' interests, saying he's done nothing wrong and hopes that an independent investigation will clear his name. Well, this morning, the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, spoke to LBC's Nick Ferrari. Let's hear from George Eustice.
Well, look, my own view on this is those who put themselves forward for election, they are fair game. You know, there's scrutiny on elected MPs in a way that no other people get. And so it's understandable that the Chancellor would get that scrutiny. We also all go into this knowing that to some extent, you know, we're exposing other family members to that scrutiny as well. That goes with the territory a bit. But as to whether it's fair or right, my view is that it shouldn't be. But you know, everybody accepts the reality that these things can be a factor. But you know, she's given an account of her own tax affairs, made clear she's going to change her tax arrangements going forward. And the Chancellor himself has referred, his own declarations, which he says he made fully, but to Lord Geit, who's the Prime Minister's advisor on ministerial interests, to look at this.
Well, I guess the big question, really, in response to what Rishi Sunak's done is does this really matter? Is it going to make any difference? I think the big question facing the Chancellor isn't so much about whether what he's done or his wife's done is within the rules or whether it's within the law, because I don't think that's really being disputed. It's not about whether it's legal. It's about whether or not it's right. And let's just sort of remind ourselves how we got to this point. First of all, we had the news that Rishi Sunak's wife was a non-dom with her tax affairs based in India, where she is a citizen. And the defence of that was that in order to keep her Indian citizenship, she had to be a non-dom, but that was proven to be not the case. We then discovered that the Chancellor was in possession of a green card in the United States while he was Chancellor. And in order to have that green card, he had to give an undertaking that he expected to spend the rest of his life domiciled living in the United States. And of course, it's not just the Chancellor and his wife that have been caught up in this row about their tax affairs. Over the weekend, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, confessed to also being a non-dom. So I think that, obviously I expect where I'm coming from on this as a Labour MP, but I'm interested to know what you think. Do you think this is all overblown, that this is a storm in a teacup and we should move on? Or do you think this is one rule for them and another rule for everyone else? Because I think the thing that sticks in my throat is we've had the Chancellor and the Health Secretary both lecturing struggling taxpayers about their duty. In the case of Sajid Javid, I think he said it was their moral duty to pay higher taxes in order to fund public services like the NHS. And yet we've now got the Chancellor and the Health Secretary managing their tax affairs in a way that means they will end up paying less tax in a way that most people in this country are simply unable to do. And the luxury of being able to choose how much tax you pay, where you pay that tax, when you pay that tax, is not one that is enjoyed by most people in this country, which is why I think it is one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. Now, some people will say this is playing the man, not the ball, and perhaps worse still, we're attacking his wife and family. But there are two reasons why this matters. One is that it's just an accepted part of ethics and propriety in government that ministers have to disclose not only their own financial interests, but the direct financial interests of the people around them. And there's a good reason for that, especially if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You're making decisions all the time about tax and spending in a way that could directly benefit you or the people around you. And so it's important those decisions are being taken for the right reasons and in the right way, and that we avoid conflicts of interest. But also it is a question of double standards. We've got Rishi Sunak having increased 15 tax rises in just 2 years, at a time when people are dealing with the worst cost of living crisis in living memory. He imposed a £20 a week cut in universal credit, which affected the very poorest people in our country, and a spring statement that delivered the biggest cut in unemployment benefits since the 1970s and plunged 500,000 children in our country into absolute poverty. So the idea that the Chancellor, who has made families in this country around £2,600 a year worse off, has been managing his tax affairs and managing his family's tax affairs in a way that means he pays less tax in this country, I think will stick in the throats of lots of people. And by the way, it's not just Labour people that are saying this. In fact, I think we've been quite careful, actually, in the way that we've posed questions and asked challenging questions of the government. I was really struck by a line in the Sunday Times this weekend which reported Conservative advisers, so these are Conservative Party advisers, describing the Chancellor and his wife as Rishi no tax and Akshata murky. Now, these are Conservative advisers who've used that kind of language. I certainly wouldn't hear it from me this morning, and I doubt you'll hear it from leading Labour politicians either. I think the question we've got to ask ourselves is this fair? Is this right? And what does he need to do about it? Because I don't think it's enough that the Chancellor has just referred himself to the Prime Minister's advisor in the hope that he will tell us what we already know, which he hasn't broken any laws. I think what we want to hear from the Chancellor is that he will fix loopholes that give very, very wealthy people like him a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to paying their fair share of tax in this country, at the same time that he's clobbering working people with huge tax rises and leaving some of the very poorest in our people much, much worse off. What kind of country have we become when there are more food banks in our country than there are McDonald's?